Hey, it's your bro. Hope you're doing well. And in this video, we're going to be discussing nested loops in C++. Let's get into it. All that nested loops are is this concept of having one loop that's inside of another loop. And these come in handy when we get to this topic on 2D arrays. They're going to be heavily used, these nested loops. So the generic syntax of a nested loop, you can either have a for loop or a while loop. There's other types of loops out there. I'm not going to bother with filling this in. So it's basically you have one loop that's inside of another loop. So it's as if we're stuck within two loops now instead of just one. There's an outer loop and there's an inner loop. And it's still possible to have more levels to this than just two, but let's keep it simple for now. So when we enter this inner for loop, we're going to be stuck cycling through this inner for loop a certain amount of times, and once we're able to exit, we can finish an iteration of the outer loop, but we may have to continue cycling through this outer for loop depending on what kind of condition we have, and once we begin a new iteration, we get stuck back within this inner for loop again and have to keep on cycling through this. So I think it would be best if I give you a demonstration of this. So we're going to create a program where we can print out a rectangle of a certain symbol that the user chooses, and we're going to give a symbol, a width, and a height to this rectangle, and this is a good demonstration of how a nested loop works. So let's begin then. Step one is that we're going to accept a character from the user, and then we're going to print a single line depending on what the user types in for a width. And then after we complete that program, we'll upgrade it to printing out a rectangle like it has two different dimensions. So let's create a char variable, and we'll call this perhaps symbol. And we will want a integer variable named perhaps width. And then later on, when we upgrade this program to a 2D rectangle, we'll include length. All right, so we'll create a display, and we will have a prompt that says enter the symbol to use. And then we will see in whatever the symbol the user types in. Okay? And we are going to see out enter the width. And then we will see in whatever the width the user types in. All right, so we'll create a for loop. And then later on, we'll turn this into a nested loop. So we'll need some sort of index or counter. The standard programming practice is to have a integer variable named I, and we'll set this equal to 0, and then add a semicolon at the end. So remember, there's three statements within this for loop. The first is declaring an index or counter of some sort. Second is the condition. So we want this for loop to iterate depending on what the width is. So we can just simply say we're going to continue this for loop as long as I is less than whatever our width is, semicolon. And lastly, we want to increment our index, so we can just type in I++. So what do we want to do during each iteration of this for loop? We want to display, so see out whatever our symbol is that the user types in. Okay, so let's run this program to test it. So this is only going to print a single line. Enter the symbol to use. How about a money symbol? Enter the width. How about 5 money symbols? All right, so we ended up with a single line, and the width was 5, and this just prints a single line of characters. Now let's turn this into a program that will display a rectangle. So we're going to add a height. So integer height, and we will create a prompt to enter the height. And we're going to change width to height for this line here. All right, so what we're going to do now is that we're going to surround this for loop with another for loop, and this outer for loop is going to be in charge of keeping track of the height of our rectangle. So we're going to take these curly brackets and surround this for loop. So now we have an outer for loop and an inner for loop. So this is now a nested loop. So this outer for loop is going to be in charge of the height of the rectangle. So it's going to be a similar process to what we have with these 3 statements within the inner for loop. One thing though is that with standard programming practice, with nested loops, they usually use a index or counter called j. And the reason that I think that they use this is because typically the default is I for an index, and I think they use j as the next one just because it comes next in the alphabet. That's my reasoning behind it. So it's going to be the same process as before. Int I equals 0, semicolon. And we're going to continue this outer for loop as long as I is less than our height, semicolon. And lastly, we're going to increment our I counter. After we exit this inner for loop, we would like to move down to the next line. Think of it like a typewriter. So after we complete one line, we would like to go down to the next line. So a simple way to do that here is that we can just C out ENDL to move down to the next line, as if it's like a typewriter or maybe a 3D printer. We'll finish printing one line, and then we will jump down to the next line and just continue the cycle until we can escape the outer for loop. So let's run this program to try it. So enter the symbol to use. This time let's try the @ sign. Enter the width, perhaps 10, and the height, maybe 12. All right, so here's our rectangle. So let's just check to see that this is accurate. So width of 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Height of 12, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Yeah, that works just fine then. So this is a fun little program you can do to create or print a rectangle with a symbol, width, and a height that you specify. So that's basically how nested loops work. It's just this general concept of having one loop that's inside of another loop, and you're not limited to just having one inner loop and one outer loop. For example, we could take this a step further and put this all within another loop, and it's kind of like we would have 3 different levels then. We have an inner loop, a middle loop, and then an outer loop. I can't really think of any practical applications for 3 different levels of loops, but I'm sure they're out there though. Really for this tutorial series, we'll only be dealing with like 2 levels at the very most, I would say. But this could be useful for maybe printing some sort of like 2D layout or something. And when we get to this topic on 2D arrays, these nested loops are actually going to come in handy to display all these elements of like a chart basically. If you need to take anything away from this, basically just a nested loop is one loop that's inside of another. We will cycle through the inner loop, and once we exit the inner loop, then we will complete one cycle of the outer loop and restart the process all over again. Oh, and a quick note that I forgot to mention when originally filming this video is that with nested loops, you're not required to have for loops. For example, you could have a set of while loops. Of course, you would have to have different statements. You couldn't have these 3 statements. You would have to have like a single condition. But yeah, you can mix it up. You can have nested loops that are while loops or for loops or a combination of for loops and while loops. It doesn't matter. Just for this example, we used for loops for the inner loop and the outer loop. If you're having some trouble understanding this concept of nested loops, don't worry. We'll be revisiting this topic again when we get to 2D arrays, and we won't really be using these anytime too soon, I would say. So you have some time to actually play around with these. But that's pretty much this lesson on nested loops. If you would like a copy of this program, I'll post all of this code in the comments down below and pin it to the top. If you're looking for additional practice or a project to work on, why don't you create a program that involves a nested loop and post it in the comments down below, because I would like to see it as well. But yeah, that is this topic on nested loops in C++. Hey you, if you enjoyed this lesson, then you can help me help you in 3 easy steps by smashing that like button, drop a comment down below, and subscribe if you'd like to become a fellow bro.